G'day mate, 40 here. So we're at the beach and Australia's detention hotels are all in the news. So the world's #1 tennis player, he got into Australia even though he didn't have a valid vaccine. And now there's a great deal of movement to deport him. So just looking at an article here in the Washington Post. Tennis star Novak Djokovic draws renewed attention to Australia's detention hotels. So Serbian star Novak Djokovic waits a court ruling whether he can stay in Australia to compete in the Australian Open. He's being held in the Park Hotel, close to the University of Melbourne. And this is a facility to host refugees and asylum seekers and for coronavirus quarantine. It's been at the center of protests over the treatment of migrants. These aren't just migrants, these are illegal migrants, right? So I'm not particularly concerned about Australia having detention hotels. So Australia denied Djokovic entry to the country. They rejected his case for medical exemption from a coronavirus vaccine requirement. I don't have a strong opinion on this. This visa drama puts a spotlight on Australia's strict COVID-19 policies and its long-standing use of detention hotels, some of which have been used for quarantine purposes. So I'm not terribly opposed to this. So as Australia has 1/50th the per capita death rate of the United States, I think that maybe their strict COVID rules have something to do with that. So the Park Hotel, where Djokovic is staying, is most associated with immigrants seeking visas to remain in Australia, some of whom have stayed in the building for years. About 50 refugees are being held now. So they're in Australia illegally. So I'm not bleeding, my heart's not bleeding over them. Human rights activists have denounced the living conditions in which refugees have been detained. Well, they can leave Australia anytime they want. So I'm not particularly concerned about these living conditions for people in the country illegally. So there have been all these demonstrations outside the facility, you know, on behalf of people in the country illegally. That's crazy. So 16 refugees tested positive for coronavirus at the facility. Well, if it's so bad there, then leave. Australia would be glad to give you a flight out. So one human rights activist says, this reckless indifference to the lives of refugees. They're not safe in the hotel. It's a sealed incubator. They can't open the windows. Well, maybe they shouldn't be in the country illegally. Asylum seekers have reported being served maggot-infested food. Well, pretty much everyone gets served maggot-infested food at some point. A fire broke out at the park last month. Yeah, I wonder who set that. So there's a Kurdish immigrant who spent 6 years held offshore on Manu Island, followed by 14 months in 2 hotels in Melbourne. He sued the Australian government under the argument that its use of hotels to hold illegal migrants is illegal. Like, he's not an Australian citizen. He doesn't have any rights here. It's ridiculous that he gets to sue the Australian government. The government locked me up illegally. He's in the country illegally. I want my rights back. You don't have any rights, mate. You're not an Australian citizen. Non-Australians have no rights in Australia, just like non-Americans have no rights in America. So Australia uses hotels for asylum seekers and refugees who are transported to the mainland from offshore detention centres for medical attention. So people coming to Australia illegally and getting medical attention and getting put up in hotels. All right, I can't afford hotels. I probably can't afford these type of hotels. And they're complaining and suing the Australian government. It's ridiculous. The whole world is watching as Novak Djokovic is detained at a Park Hotel prison. Well, the reason the world is watching because he's the world's #1 tennis player, right? Maybe if you're as equally excellent as him, the whole world would be riveted by your situation. I was imprisoned there in tiny rooms without fresh air. Then leave, go home. Australia doesn't need you. No one deserves this. Then leave. You came here illegally. Let's not forget the people that will remain long after Djokovic leaves. Well, they don't have to stay. Okay, so this hotel where Djokovic has been sent is holding asylum seekers who've been detained for more than 8 years by Australia. Well, they can leave at any time. They're not being detained against their will. They're just being detained in the sense that they're not free to enter Australia. So Serbian president accuses Australia of mistreatment and harassment towards Novak Djokovic, said the whole of Serbia is standing behind him. Well, Djokovic chose not to get vaccinated, so my heart is not bleeding that he's having a little bit of aggro trying to play in the Australian Open. So Australia's implemented one of the world's strictest policies to contain the coronavirus. Yeah, and Australia also has some of the strictest policies in the world to deal with illegal immigrants. You try to come to Australia illegally and you will not call Australia home. So Australia's strict policies with both immigration and coronavirus seem to have worked out in the best interests of Australians, saying Australia should be stripped of Grand Slam status for a few years because they're going to deport Djokovic, who's coming to the country illegally. Djokovic could get vaccinated. He just has to get the jab. These problems will go away. So my heart does not bleed for Novak Djokovic. And did you hear what happened with the Sydney Festival? So the Sydney Festival is an arts festival here in Sydney. And one of the sponsors of the Sydney Arts Festival is the Israeli Embassy. They donated something like $20,000. There's some kind of dance performance at the Sydney Arts Festival that partnered up with a Tel Aviv dance company. And all these Muslims have just, reacted, and other, Arab supporters. So about 30 artists have dropped out of the Sydney Arts Festival because the festival took a donation from the Israeli Embassy. I mean, that seems extreme. Can you imagine any other country, right? If China had donated to the Arts Festival, or Sudan, or Nigeria, or Russia. So which jab for Djokovic, number 1, number 2, or number 3? Well, as far as I know, he has not received any. So if he's unwilling to get vaccinated, then it seems reasonable to me. I don't necessarily support it, but it certainly seems reasonable to ban him, right? It seems like a reasonable attempt to try to contain the possible damages of COVID infections. So anyway, Sydney Arts Festival, all these artists have dropped out simply because the Arts Festival took a donation from the Israeli Embassy. So it's ironic that many Jewish activists and Jewish organizations played a huge role in ending Australia's White Australia policy. And as a result of this pro-immigration activism, hundreds of thousands of Muslims have come to Australia, and now they hate Israel. Does Djokovic need to get all 3? I think the requirement is to get 2. But at some point, if the requirement moves to 3, I can't be terribly upset about that. If there's strong evidence that 3 shots provides more protection than 2 shots, and it seems that the evidence points that direction, then I don't see the problem with that. So it's interesting, the animus aimed at Israel and the Sydney Arts Festival simply for taking a donation from the Israeli Embassy. And so the multicultural Australia that the big Jewish organizations in Australia and the social and political activists have fought for is now coming back to bite Jews in the buttocks, and not for the first time.